Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hey guys, original link to the video, top of the description. I can't believe my upper lip is actually all good. If I were to record myself an hour ago, which I kind of wanted to do because it looked kind of funny, anyways, I went to the dentist earlier and numbing on my upper lip so they could do some work. Not important. Hi guys, original link to the original video from Caspian Report, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Love to have you. Preemptive, like why Ukraine joining NATO would crush Russian power. Would crush Russian military interests, maybe. Okay, yeah, let's find out.
Atop Kiev skyline, the Motherland Monument stands perched atop Kiev skyline. The Motherland Monument stands like a sentinel guarding over the city. Once adorned with a hammer and sickle representing the Soviet Union, its wings and insignia now transform into a trident, a symbol deeply embedded in Ukraine's national heritage. This deliberate reimagining is far more than cosmetic. It is a visual testament to Ukraine's firm determination to sever the umbilical ties with its Russian past. The symbolic change represents a call to embrace a future that is uniquely Ukrainian, one that aligns more closely with the ideals and sensibilities of the West.
Guys, how does the current Russian government think about the Soviet Union and think about, the Russian Empire? Because didn't Putin make a comparison of the what's it called? That group, Prigozhin, leading that group, Wagner, saying like they're almost I don't even want to call it an attempted coup. It was like almost an attempted coup. He kind of like connected it to the day that the Russian Tsar was assassinated or something. And so that confused me. I'm like, wait, how does the current Russians, do they see the Soviet Union as good, as bad? Just curious if anyone knows.
But Ukraine joining the Western sphere, more precisely NATO, would revolutionize the geopolitical map. Russia would be placed in an irreversible chokehold. Its demographic and industrial core, situated in the European part, would be militarily outflanked on land, air, and sea. Russian defense spending would surge to accommodate the new reality, but it wouldn't do much good. The war in Ukraine shows that sometimes fairy tales are true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten.
Caspian Report's a great channel. I've been watching them for a few years.
Last week, NATO announced its biggest military exercise since the Cold War against the backdrop of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to the military committee, 40,000 soldiers will exercise in Germany, Poland, and the Baltic states. That's a big deal. On ground news, I can see that over 40 sources are reporting on this. 50% of them lean right, making this a potential blind spot for the left. Looking deeper, I noticed that left this.
Hold on, I was gonna say, I'm gonna listen to that again, but it'd be awesome if Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, Poland kind of had joint Baltic naval exercises just to like strengthen that area.
It's a potential blind spot for the left. Looking deeper, I noticed that left-leaning sources directly state that the exercise is intended to prepare for a potential Russian invasion on member countries, while on the right, the first two sources I see are media outlets owned by the Russian government. Their coverage highlighted negative comments from the US military committee chair and furthered the narrative that NATO expansion is one of the main reasons behind the military operation in Ukraine. I appreciate that ground news includes these sources, while also noting their affiliation, as many social media companies and news aggregators have removed Russian sources from their platforms.
I love that. I love that this is a thing. I'm gonna probably check it out, but it is insane how media places see their viewers as children that need to be protected from potentially propagandize news sources. I get the argument, but we're in a time where news organizations, I'm already talking a lot, so not that I don't trust that they're going to tell the truth, but I don't trust that they're going to be very balanced in their reporting to give me a good perception. I'd rather be given all of the things, even if they're not great, than have someone nitpick the things that they think I should see. And so this is a good idea, whatever this is.
Information from the record and leaving us in the dark about their motives. Knowing how the news is presented is just as important as the news itself. I want to thank Ground News for sponsoring this video, and I highly encourage you to check them out as a resource. Caspian Report viewers get 30% off their unlimited access plan using my link.
If you're interested like I am here, make sure, and you go through with this, make sure to use their stuff, guys.
We live in an increasingly complicated world, and it's about time we modernize the way we read the news. For centuries, Ukraine has served as a dynamic crossroads between Eastern and Western civilizations. Its history is a complex tapestry of cultural, historical, and political influences. Its landscape, however, is predominantly flat. What mountains it has are found solely in the west, specifically in the Carpathians and along the coast of Crimea in the south. The rest of the country is as flat as imaginable. A vast expanse of flat and fertile terrain stretches across the territory, a palpable manifestation of Ukraine's unique role as a connecting thread between diverse worlds.
Wow, that's crazy how important this area is then. I didn't realize that. Because there's a ton of oil here as well, right? And they have a lot of great arable land. You can see how important this area is to Russia.
The landscape consists of sprawling plains, known as steppes, which extend like an enormous patchwork of golden wheat fields and green pastures. These agricultural riches have not only shaped Ukraine's economic fortunes, but have also irrevocably linked its destiny to that of its neighboring countries. This exceptional geography has lent itself to Ukraine's historical role as a setting for trade, cultural exchange, and unfortunately, conflict. Interestingly, even the lexicon reflects this complex and multi-layered identity. The name Ukraine derived from the Slavic word that signifies borderlands, which, once again, underscores its enduring role as a strategic buffer. The contrasts within the state are vividly striking. In the western reaches, the city of Lviv serves as a tangible testament to Ukraine's deep-rooted European connections. With its cobblestone streets, Baroque and Renaissance architecture, and a culture steeped in Western European traditions, Lviv feels like a slice of Europe tucked away in Ukraine. On the other end of the spectrum, in the east, lie cities like Donetsk and Luhansk, which share stronger cultural and historical ties with Russia. The influence of the Russian language, Eastern Orthodox Christianity.
I forget if this is the Dnieper or the Volga. I think it's Volgograd, I'm assuming, is on the Volga. So this is the Dnieper. I don't know how to pronounce it. But it seems like an extremely wide river as it goes through Ukraine. So it's going to be I'm sure throughout time, is going to be a very separating a border that is, separates a lot of cultural stuff. So it makes sense. As well as being a big military barrier, defensive.
Russia, the Luhansk, which share stronger cultural and historical ties with Russia. The influence of the Russian language, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and Soviet-era industrialism permeate the region, offering a different panorama of life. Sandwiched between the two is the capital city, Kiev. Charged with the task of bridging the chasm between regional identities, Kiev stands as a microcosm of Ukraine's complex national tapestry. With its iconic golden dome churches and bustling modern boulevards, the city embodies the intricate blend of Eastern and Western influences that define Ukraine. Amidst these regional currents, however, lies a larger geopolitical reality. The same flat plains that cover Ukraine also sweep across Belarus and into Russia. Ukraine's literary, artistic, and intellectual contributions have seeped across its borders, leaving an indelible mark on Russian society. Shared folklore, language nuances, and creative expressions have cultivated a unique cultural synergy.
Does anyone know, can Ukrainians and Russian people understand each other when they talk? Or is it very different? That's my question.
Today, institutions like the European Union and NATO, with Poland often leading the charge, regard Ukraine as a pivotal battleground to contain Russian influence. However, this strategic maneuvering belies the complex historical and cultural ties that intertwine the fates of these neighboring nations. Without any distinguishing geographic features in between, the national boundaries of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia are often seen by the locals as simply lines on a map, just ink on paper and nothing more. That has been the traditional mindset. The flat plains that extend into Russia form the backbone of the Russian core, which stretches from the cultural metropolis of St. Petersburg to the historic city of Kazan to the trade nexus Volgograd. This vast region houses most of Russia's population and serves as the epicenter for policy decisions from the Kremlin. But the very flatness of this terrain creates nearly insurmountable vulnerabilities. As the extensive plain unfurls eastward, it leaves Russia exposed along a 2,000-kilometer spread. This spatial expanse...
Wow, yeah, that would clearly be very much... If Russia could close in, like if Russia successfully captured Ukraine, that would shorten the funnel from this giant green line to pretty much just Poland, right? Poland is still a large place, but like if I was Russia, I would love to have my border here rather than here, because you can't use the geographical, I forget what these mountains are called right here, that sort of surround Hungary as a natural boundary.
2,000-kilometer spread. This spatial expanse complicates safeguarding Russia's territorial security, demanding an enormous commitment of both manpower and financial resources. No other nation on Earth has a military vulnerability of this scale and magnitude. The economic strain induced by these military commitments siphon off vital resources from other crucial sectors, undermining Russia's overall strategic posture. The flat Russian core places the country in a tough spot. Moscow must continuously grapple with the enduring implications of historical border revisions, all while striving to maintain a semblance of security along its lengthy borders. Seen in this way, the loss of the Soviet boundaries cost the Russians dearly, both politically and economically. Russia finds itself obligated to maintain a gargantuan front line adjacent to some of the world's most technologically advanced military forces. It has been a costly status quo. When it comes to Ukraine, however, the stakes accelerate exponentially. Directly to
so if you take all morality out of it, and you want your interests and protection as a country, the invasion makes complete sense, right? If you could conquer Ukraine, again, that completely shortens the kind of funnel you have here. You still have, but so I get it there. I'm not saying that
to the east
I'm not saying that it was their only choice, but I mean,
of Ukraine's border, the rolling landscape continues uninterrupted for 750 kilometers to the city of Astrakhan by the shore of the Caspian Sea. This territorial stretch of land is known as the Volgograd Gap. For the Russian state, few regions carry as much strategic weight as this corridor of territory. If a foreign power were to gain substantial influence over Ukraine and consequently secure the ability to close off access through the Volgograd Gap, the implications for Russia would be catastrophic.
That's exactly what Germany tried to do in World War II, right? They got stopped. Obviously, Stalingrad, big battle. But they were trying to do this to cut off and gain a lot of, so again, this is a giant, got it, right?
It would effectively cut Russia from places like the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea. Such a move would relegate Russia to an increasingly vulnerable geographic core, essentially turning it into a more isolated and encircled entity. This scenario would not just compromise Russia's regional aspirations, it would also pose an existential threat to the very integrity of the Russian Federation. By closing the Volgograd Gap, a foreign power could potentially create a strategic choke point, rendering Russia susceptible to foreign intervention and destabilization.
Okay, this is, but, so the nuclear weapons thing. So I've heard all the things and I get it. It's crazy to think Russia would use a nuclear weapon. It would mean certain destruction for them. But, I mean, if the U.S. was being conquered, right, I think the U.S. would probably use nuclear weapons rather than be conquered. So I believe if Moscow is encroached upon, I think they would use it, right? So I get it with... not using it with Ukraine, right? It's an offensive war. They might not see it that way, but it clearly is. But who would ever try to close the Volgograd Gap against a nation with thousands of nuclear weapons? That if you think that Russia would never use a nuclear weapon under any circumstance, or America or China or any nuclear nation, you might be right, but it's too dangerous to just assume you're right, okay? So I think doing something like closing the Volgograd Gap, as long as you have nuclear capable, it's just, how is that even a foreseeable thing if any country doing that would be inviting nuclear war, Does that make sense?
It wouldn't be...
I don't know what I'm talking about with a lot of this stuff, guys. Please... not just feel free, but I invite, if I said anything wrong, please correct me, all right?
Just a strategic setback, but an unparalleled crisis that would question the very survival of the Russian state as we know it. And this isn't just speculative theory. During World War I, Germany aimed for strategic mastery over Ukraine with the express intent of exploiting the Volgograd Gap as a means to compel Russia into a humiliating capitulation.
Same thing, World War II, right?
During World War II, the Germans tried again and made it as far as Volgograd City, known back then as Stalingrad.
Okay.
Russia's survival
Okay, so Volgograd was Stalingrad. Okay.
hung on a knife's edge until long after the German invasion was repelled. And even after the hostilities were said and done, the fact that a foreign army came this close to destroying Russia left a deep impression on the national psyche. Fast forward to the present day, the security of the Volgograd Gap is etched into Russia's DNA. This is not merely a matter of territorial integrity, but an issue that strikes at the core of Russia's national survival. It's for this existential reason that Russia perceives Ukraine not just as a buffer state, but as an indispensable shield against Western encroachment. This rationale explains Russia's armed conflict in Ukraine and its unwillingness to relinquish, based on...
I mean, they're undoubtedly correct in that, right? Please tell me we can have conversations about this with anyone inferring that I'm somehow defending Russia's interests or their invasion of Ukraine. Obviously not. But I would agree with them there that Ukraine is very key. And if Ukraine got into NATO, then that's kind of game over for you for any future conflict with NATO. So as insane as you might think doing anything like they did is, I mean, I think that's not really debatable. That's just true, right?
On cold, calculated geopolitical needs, Russia's objective is to push as much west as possible. Ideally, the Russians would want to occupy the territory up to the Carpathians, which means taking over all of Ukraine. Doing so would reduce Russia's exposed flank from 2,000 to 600 kilometers, a much more manageable vulnerability. This is also why the Soviet Union had drawn its borders as it did, trying to anchor by as many geographic points as possible. However, the collapse of the Soviet Union threw Russia back to its 18th century territorial boundaries. Losing Ukraine to NATO would set Russia back to its 16th century borders. For Russia, the stakes couldn't be higher. This then explains why the Russians keep fighting, regardless of the costs. A NATO-allied Ukraine would crush Russian power. The leadership in Kiev would likely seize the opportunity to exploit the Volgograd Gap. While the consolidation of power wouldn't materialize instantaneously, it would commence a slow but inexorable buildup over decades, significantly shifting the balance of power in Eastern Europe.
Okay.
The strategic...
All right, I was going to say, what is with all this talk of them like eventually continuing and like fighting into the Volgograd Gap? But they mean that as a show of force and showing Russia, hey, if we do have an all-out war, look at all these NATO people right next to the Volgograd Gap. Not like Germany did in World War I, not like Germany did in World War II. That's like, it's like a checkpoint that Germany wished they had at the start of either war to quickly crush Russia here. But again, I get it as a intimidation token, right? But any serious war, would it not result in, I really would, if anything I see in the comments, if anyone would tell me, like, what do you think would take for Russia to use them? Would an invasion in the Volgograd Gap lead to nuclear war? I guess is my question.
Significantly shifting the balance of power in Eastern Europe.
And if it didn't, where do you think it would start? If you tell me they still wouldn't use nuclear weapons, even if Moscow was under attack, I think you're crazy. What is there to lose at that point, you know?
Decades, significantly shifting the balance of power.
Well, lives, but they don't.
In Eastern Europe. The strategic...
Stop talking, Jesus!
Instantaneously, it would commence a slow but inexorable buildup over decades, significantly shifting the balance of power in Eastern Europe. The strategic repercussions of such a shift would echo across generations, altering the geopolitical landscape in a manner that could hardly be overstated. But there is more. Going further south towards the Black Sea, the Crimean Peninsula holds the key to reconfiguring Russia's influence in the periphery. The Black Sea has historically served as Russia's gateway connecting Eastern Europe to the Mediterranean and the open oceans. Operating as a crucial nexus linking Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East, the Black Sea region is central to Moscow's geo-economic policy. A policy that not only projects power and influence in the Mediterranean, but also increases Southern Europe's reliance on Russian oil and gas. However, ever since...
Does Vladivostok in the Far East get frozen in as well? Or is that... I mean, even if it doesn't, it's so far away that it's not exactly an ideal main port.
Russia lost its Soviet borders, its influence in the region has depended solely on the Crimean Peninsula. But it's not all about economics. Crimea, in many ways, can be described as the soft underbelly of Russian power projection. A concentrated and determined NATO effort to remove Russian control from Crimea would deal a decisive blow to Moscow's capacity to exert influence across the Black Sea. The Crimean Peninsula is a territory brimming with strategic significance. Whoever controls it gains the power to change the rules of the game and fundamentally alter the balance of forces. For instance,
there was a big battle at Sevastopol in the Crimean War, right?
The rules of the game and fundamentally alter the balance of forces. For instance, Russia's military conquest of South Ukraine would not have been possible without its assets in Crimea. If the roles were reversed, however, if a foreign power were to control Crimea, it would be in a prime position to harass and disrupt the movement of Russian military forces all across the northern Caucasus, especially at the time of closing the Volgograd Gap. Without Crimea, the Russians would have to devote substantially more resources towards defensive measures. This then would demand even more military commitments and resources on top of the 2,000-kilometer exposed front line. That is not a sustainable existence. Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea sent shockwaves across the international stage and amplified tensions in the region. The Crimean Tatars and their unwavering resistance against Russian occupation, backed by Ukraine's resolve, underscore how the peninsula could emerge as a rallying point for undoing Russian power. If Ukraine were to become part of NATO, and Crimea was somehow returned to Ukrainian control, the Black Sea would turn into a NATO lake. A Turkish lake to be more precise, since they have the most competent navy in the region. Either way, Ukraine joining NATO would restrict the operational capacity of the Russian Navy to its territorial waters. In turn, this would weaken Russia's influence over countries historically within its sphere, like Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Countries where Russia backs local separatist movements to gain leverage with the host nations. Should Ukraine join NATO, Russia's separatist holdings in Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, separatist movements to gain leverage with the host nation.
So that means supporting people in the countries against the government to then like use as a token to bargain with the government itself there. That's interesting.
Should Ukraine join NATO, Russia's separatist holdings in Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Karabakh would collapse like a house of cards. The host nations would then be free to recalibrate their foreign policy needs, moving away from Russian influence and closer to NATO membership. So, Ukraine joining NATO could ignite a domino effect in the periphery. It wouldn't happen instantly, but eventually, in a decade or two, Russia would find itself encircled in a new reality where its demographic and industrial core would be flanked on all sides: the Black Sea, the South Caucasus, and the Caspian Sea. It would be an encirclement Russia wouldn't be able to overcome. All the anti-Russian rhetoric seen in recent years in Europe and elsewhere is building up to a changing geopolitical landscape. Ukraine is set to play a central role in that calculus, and joining NATO would mark a new chapter in its history. Like a self-fulfilling prophecy, by invading Ukraine, Russia inadvertently triggered the Ukrainians to chase objectives that had previously been a source of apprehension. Now, tens of thousands of casualties later, bridges have been burnt, hunters have turned into prey, and the Ukrainians are looking to get even. In that pursuit for payback, nations tend to become like the worst in those they oppose. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. All of our content is crowdfunded. If you want to be part of that network and gain access to some premium perks like early access, PDF files, etc., consider joining our platform on Patreon or the YouTube membership program. You'll find the links in the description box. In any case, thank you for your time, and Sahol.
Thank you for making another great video, Caspian Report. So, my main question, guys. I'd appreciate any comments at all, any answers or whatever, but I feel like there are some people who, maybe this is true, who see, like, okay, like, no, they, even if they went up to Moscow, they still wouldn't use the nuclear weapon, nuclear bomb, because everyone that they have to go through to finish the bomb, right? All would have to accept that they're essentially signing their and their family's own death warrant by pressing it, right? And so so they might choose their families over the current administration of Russia continuing, right? But then, so are you suggesting then, any of you who say that, which I understand your point, that then do then do you believe that nuclear weapons are just might as well just be duds because no one in any scenario whatsoever would ever use them? I know I'm kind of arguing a ghost, but I'm pretty certain it's going to be an opinion some people have. And I don't entirely disagree. I'm definitely not on board with that, but nuclear bombs have only been used on another country, the US or Japan, that didn't have nuclear weapons itself and wasn't in a treaty with anyone who had nuclear weapons, right? So that's different, but I'm just wondering, when do you think a country like Russia or the United States, like when would you use a nuclear weapon? Or is it just you never use it because even if your country is about to fall, you'd be killing way more of your citizens in a giant bang going out? So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about that. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you enjoy that, learn something, or can teach me something in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.